Most writers dream of being a best-selling author. Oh, come on, don't lie. Even if you dream of being an author who writes something really good or something artistic, or if you say you're just writing for yourself, you know that the idea of being a best-selling author has kind of tickled your fancy a little bit. After all, book sales kind of are reflective of our value as a writer, even if that's not always completely true. It's something that's in the back of our mind. And really, after all our hard work, we all want to write a book that sells, but that's not always something that happens. You know the horrible figures about how few books authors sell after working on them for months and months, probably even years. So today I think it's really important on the How to Be an Author podcast that we talk about writing a book that sells. And you may end up a little bit frustrated because it might not be what you'd hoped. There is no real magic bullet. And also it's a lot of the lies that we've been telling ourselves about why certain books sell. Oh, the author knew someone, or they had this huge advertising campaign by their publisher and they were just lucky. Sometimes those things aren't so true. So you might be like, wait, what? I need to do work to do this? Or you may come away inspired because there are some things that bestsellers have in common. And you might be answering under your breath right now, nothing much, just random magic and a huge advertising campaign. But that's not always true. As I said, what all best-selling books have in common, or at least 99.999, it starts off with an intention and a plan. It starts with clarity in the planning, in the audience, and in the writing. And then this intentionality carries through with the writing and continues with marketing. That's right. Selling more copies comes with a plan all the way through. It comes with intention. No loosey-goosey here. No writing by the seat of your pants. That can be a first step for fun, but if you're planning on selling more copies, which is, kind of something that many of us dream of doing because we dream of maybe living from our writing one day, let's get a plan together. And in case you're wondering what I'm talking about when I talk about bestsellers and books that sell, let's agree to dispense with vanity benchmarks like, Amazon bestseller. You can achieve that if you choose a small enough niche, but you know that you're not actually selling more books. You just did that to make it look like you are. And let's not talk about appearing in magazine articles or this and that, because that's cool. But does that always move the needle? Not always. We want to talk about actually selling more books. So let's drop the appearances. Let's dispense with, that whole writing for myself thing. And let's just admit to ourselves that we do care about sales a little bit, and we do want to sell as many copies as possible, not just because we're money-grubbing, greedy little writers, but because we want to touch as many readers as possible. And that means, unless we're giving our books away, which you can choose to, and that's actually one of the strategies I might touch on today. If you want to touch as many readers as possible, that means selling as many books as possible. Now, don't worry, if you've already written your book, you're not going to have to start over, because even though writing a bestseller starts at the concept stage, if you've written your book, and even if it's already about to be published or has been published, there are some tweaks that are going to be super useful to you. And otherwise, there's always the next book. It's never too early to be thinking about a book that sells. And I'm going to front load one of the secrets of writing success. It's being prolific. That really helps. The more books you have out, the more chances you have of selling well. And that is something, my friends, that I'm working on myself. I have, a lot of stuff going on, but I'm definitely working on getting more books out there sooner. And so that's another one of the secrets. I'm going to be touching on that. You might be surprised at some of the things that you're going to learn in this episode, but let me tell you, it's a good one. And in the bonus materials, I'm going to tell you my weird methods for determining proof of concept. These may be weird, but they're gold. So don't think you're going to listen to this podcast and have the perfect formula down, but each of the things I'm going to talk about today have been proven to move the needle for some writers. So do them all or almost all, and it could do a huge load of good for you. It could make a massive difference. Now, here's what's important as well. Since this is writing advice, writing tips, marketing advice, marketing tips, these are advice and tips. They are opinion-based. There are things that have worked for some writers. If something truly doesn't resonate for you, don't just freak out and be like, wow, this writing coach chick is completely nuts. No. First of all, let's figure out why it's not resonating. Is it resistance? And by the way, if you don't know for sure what resistance is, you might want to circle back and listen to our episode on that from a couple of weeks ago. But is it resistance, or is it truly not who you are as a writer? Some of these things really don't resonate with writers, and that's okay. If there's something that is really not representative of who you are and what you want to be as a writer, feel free to ignore. But believe me, you're going to find some things that are going to be like, whoa, why didn't I think of this before? This whole episode is filled with new ways of looking at this whole task of writing and selling a book. So it's going to be really, really useful. And if you're a member of Writing Coach On Demand, you'll be getting some worksheets and a checklist, as well as that bonus podcast. And we're going to be talking about those hacks to increase sellability. So thank you for joining me, and let's get started talking about writing a book and marketing a book that sells. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karena Akhavein, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Thank you for joining me on the How to Be an Author podcast. We're going to be talking about a number of steps that go into writing a book that sells, because after all, you're putting in this work and you don't want to waste your time. However, there is going to be some time involved, because one of the parts of writing a book that sells is really devoting enough time and energy to making sure that it's good. You can't have that shortcut of being like, I'm going to write a piece of absolute trash and writers are going to be crazy about it. No, most times writing a book that sells means creating a quality work. Now, that doesn't mean it needs to be ultra long. It doesn't need to be the great American novel. It doesn't need to be sheer poetry, but it needs to be polished in the specific ways that your specific ideal reader cares about. So keep that in mind. But let me go through all the steps, and then I'll be elaborating on them more as we go throughout this podcast. So your first step starts before you even start writing. There's going to be some foundation work, and we're going to be talking about that. There's going to be some determining what your goals are for your specific work. I think that's really, really important, so that you're putting success in your GPS and you are not flying completely blind. There's going to be some work dedicated to figuring out who your audience is, because writing a book is about the reader. Then I'm going to be talking about the kind of topics that you're going to be looking at, and then what goes into the writing process with this book. What are the key things that differentiate a book that does okay or that doesn't do well at all and a book that actually gains a lot of readership? I'm going to be talking about the editing and the proofreading, and then I'm going to be talking about book production, publishing, and marketing that makes sure that your book is going to sell as many copies as possible. And then there's going to be what to do next. And don't forget, if you're part of the Writing Coach On Demand, you're going to hear also about the weird but effective ways in which I test proof of concept with my book. And then also you're going to get those questionnaires as to, does my book have what it takes to be a best-selling book? Okay, let's circle back to this foundation work I talked about that you require in order to write that best-selling book. I have a fun little piece of homework for you. So I think that a great thing to do is to start your foundation work in the real world, because after all, this is where bestseller status begins, in the real world, with people. This is how we need to start to shift our mindset, because we do so many things virtually, but writing a bestseller and having that bestseller go viral really depends a lot on word of mouth and on people enjoying your book. So go to the bookstore. go to a bookstore or several bookstores. And this is kind of a instant visual on what is going on in publishing today. You get a real snapshot of this. And of course, you can do this online on Amazon as well. And I recommend you do a combo of those two things, because with Amazon, you'll be able to see what the actual sales numbers are. You're going to be able to look at book reviews and things like that. But go to a bookstore and see what's displayed and how it's displayed. This is going to give you a real fast first impression of what's there, because the covers are a great first impression. You get to see them all at once and see what kind of captures your attention, right? Look and see which books are doing best, which ones are displayed, where they're displayed, and just see, talk to maybe some of the booksellers and be like, what's selling in general? What's selling in, my specific genre, and what's going on? How are these things being pushed? What kind of readers are coming in interested in these books? Now, you can go to several bookstores and see if there are real trends that you can start to see about what's going on in books in general and in your genre. I think that that's a great first step. Now, you're going to look up, after you come back from this whole bookstore expedition and your Amazon research expedition, you are going to come up with a list of a couple authors or a few authors that you admire most in your genre. These are the authors that you think, wow, they're really killing it. If only I could kind of be like that, I would totally model my writing success after theirs. Well, you can, right? You're going to stalk the crap out of these authors, not in a creepy way, but you're going to look at their social media. You're going to look at their website. You're going to track down any interviews they've given, any podcasts they've been on, any, articles that came out about them. Find out about their unique path to success and look and see where they are today. See if you can reverse engineer what they did. Now, each author may have a secret sauce that is involved in their crazy success, and it's now up to you to see which of these secret sauces aligns best with you and the kind of writer you are and want to be, right? So reverse engineering success, it's not a magic bullet. It's not something that's going to work automatically. But boy, let me tell you, it's a lot better than just trying to feel your way around without having a blueprint for how you might want to do these things. So when I built my whole writing coaching business, I didn't just make it up. At first I did, and it was a little bit all over the place. I started emulating other coaches in other domains and also other people in the writing space and seeing what they were doing right, and then what there was space needed for, what things were missing, right? And that's how I positioned myself as a writing coach. And also it's important to know what your strengths are, right? So you know what kind of writer you are or what writer you can be. How can you position yourself above and beyond these writers that you admire? Now, from these writers that you admire, choose about 2 or 3 of the books that seem like they're closest to what you want your book to be. And you are going to give them a careful read. I would say give them one first read for like the initial impression and jot down some notes. Try to determine where the magic is. Literally, determining where the magic is literally where the magic is when it comes to you figuring out what this writer did to garner so much readership. Read it through quickly, get that initial first impression, be like, how did I feel about this? Why do I think this book is successful? And then maybe give it a second close reading to see what those moments of magic are. Like, when are you reading and getting goosebumps and going, yes, this is what I want to create? You can be intentional about that and figure out how to make that happen with your own book, right? Is it super emotional, or is the setting something that just really inspires you? Or is there some kind of a big idea that you're like, whoa, this blows me away? That big idea is pretty important too. We're going to talk more about that in just a little bit, but just dissect those books. Now, you are not this other writer, so determine your real goals, right? Writing a book can definitely help you to achieve some goals in your life. So think about what your writing goals are, what your personal goals are, what your ideal life looks like, because chances are there's some similarities with the lives of these writers that you're admiring, and there are some differences. So these writers that you admire, are they super involved in a specific community? Do they give back? Are they still very active professionally, and has this book helped them to make more of an impact in what they're interested in? All of these things are great responses. So think about that, because that is also something that you can reverse engineer and focus on. You're also going to want to know who your audience is. This is so important because I know so many writers who are so excited about their book idea. They personally are passionate about their book idea. And you know what? They don't pause to really think about the reader. And I can't stress this strongly enough. This is literally, if I needed to stress a single concept today that you need to believe in and just embody, this whole thing is about the reader. No reader, no bestseller. So you can't just write a book in a vacuum and think that you're going to have a bestseller. You may, and that would be a complete accident. You would be the complete outlier. Bestsellers are about something that impacts the reader. So it's not about you. It's not about you, the next wonderful writer. It's not about the sentence you think is super awesome. It's not about that tertiary character that you think is really cool and that your beta readers said that you don't need, but you're going to fight them because this is your book after all. Yes, this is your book. But if you want your book to sell well, you are trying to make it about the reader. This is planning. You're going to have to forget your dreams of just writing something brilliant by the seat of your pants. Honestly, does this happen? Maybe once. Otherwise, you're going to tell a story that works. You're going to need to tell a story that inspires. You're going to need to tell a story that is relatively easily absorbed and that readers just get it under their skin. And for that, my friend, you are going to need an outline. That's just what it is. I talk about the story spine a lot in my writing coaching teachings, and I talk about it with a lot of clients, and I talk about outlines, and I really get a lot of pushback. And the reason that I keep pushing this despite the pushback is because it is so important. Your artistic freedom is one thing, but writing a story that works may be a bit of another thing, and see if you can find a way to reconcile those two things. But it's all about your decisions of what you want as a goal. If you just want to write a novel that is exactly the novel that you dream of for yourself, great. But if you want to have those readers, write for your readers. And that means writing a story that works. Okay, now let's talk about your topic, because, this whole foundation work, we still haven't talked about your book idea. And I'm sure that you probably already had an idea, because most people start off with an idea. Most writers, some of them say, I want to be a writer. I want to write a book. But many times it starts with, wow, this would be a great idea for a book, right? Just know that there are good ideas and there are better ideas, right? So just because you have an idea for a story, think to yourself, is this a big enough idea? Because here's the other thing about bestsellers. They become bestsellers because not just that they're a cool story or that there's a lot of emotion and the characters are nice. Many times this bestseller happens because there is a big idea, which is something just new enough or just big enough or just interesting enough or intriguing enough that it'll get people excited and thinking about it and talking about it. Remember that word of mouth thing I talked about briefly? We're going to be hearing a lot more about it. The more excited people are about your idea, the more new it is, the more big it is, the more you have a chance of people talking about you. So think about your big idea. Is it something that can be distilled into an elevator pitch? Is it something that you can express easily? Because when people talk about your book and they're trying to tell somebody else to read it, they're not going to want to have to sit there and be like, okay, it's complicated, but blah, blah, blah. No, they're going to say, it's an amazing book about blah. I had never thought of that before. That's incredible. Or it's set blah. It's such a great setting. It's really unique. Or the character is blah. You won't believe this. And they're not blah, they're exciting, right? I'm just using blah as a filler. So yeah, think about this big idea. I think about somebody who I'm going to be quoting later on in this episode, who's written a bunch of bestsellers, which are nonfiction, Ryan Holiday. He always starts with a massive idea. Malcolm Gladwell does this as well, right? Starts with a huge idea. Even good videos or good blog posts start with a big idea. Starts with a hook. Think about a hook. You need an incredible hook. By the way, I've been working on creating a TikTok account for my writing alter ego pen name. And in just a month and a half, I've already gotten up to 25,000 followers. And that's because I started off with a strong idea. And I'll be telling you more about that later, because I think that I'm now in a unique position to start to teach authors how to really knock it out of the park with their TikTok or with their social media. But I'm still putting the finishing touches on that whole strategy. But so far, so good. So we'll be talking about that later. So think about your topic and make sure that that big idea is there. If you have written your book already, it might be too late for that. But think about, is there any way of tweaking my idea or adding something to it that is going to improve that? Now, you're going to write your book, right? Do you notice how this comes so far down in the list of things to do to create a bestseller? But this is firmly in the middle section of our to-do list. Writing our book is really important, right? And there are certain things about that book that you're writing that need to be there. You are not trying to write poetry here. That's just a bonus. You are aiming for clarity. You are aiming on communicating your big ideas to your ideal reader. So when you're writing this book, your goal is to start really, really strong. This is key. There's so many writers I work with who are slowly building up their book. And, by the middle, it's really, really exciting and it starts to chug along. But here's the thing. I know what's going on in the middle because I was paid to read their book or to edit their book. But if I were a reader, would I still be reading? No. So make sure that your book starts strong. That doesn't necessarily mean starting in media res with a fight scene or with some, crazy extreme thing like a murder or somebody falling out of the sky, right? That doesn't mean that. It just means starting strong with a strong tone that makes us feel something, right? That can be a feeling. It can be an interesting location or a character quirk, something that gets us invested. What you're doing here is you're making us a promise as readers, right? You as the writer are making us readers a promise that you're going to keep throughout the book. So remember that. Keep us invested throughout the book. Your major steps when you're editing and proofreading are to make sure that this book does not lose the reader at any point. When you lose a reader who doesn't finish your book, there's a chance of getting a bad review, and you don't want that. So let's talk about this editing and proofreading step because it's almost more important than the writing step. It is absolutely not optional and is probably much more important than you ever thought because honestly, you've heard that thing that says that good writing is rewriting, etc., etc. So here's that time when I'm going to quote Ryan Holiday from his book called Perennial Seller, which is a highly recommended read for anyone who's thinking about writing and marketing a book to remain a good seller throughout its lifespan, which should be long, right? Because too many of us, and we'll talk about this in a second, too many of us write our book, we put it out there and we're like, boom, well, if it doesn't sell a gazillion copies right away, then that's it, trickles down and it stops. The goal here is to sustain your selling over time, right? So let's listen to this quote by Ryan Holiday from Perennial Seller. He says, "Our goal here is to make something that people rave about, that becomes part of their lives. The buried insights found in those other great works were not put there on first pass. Work is unlikely to be layered if it's written in a single stream of consciousness. No, deep, complex work is built through a relentless, repetitive process of revisitation." That's super important, right? Look at each part of your book. Refine what you're saying. Make sure that that big idea of yours that you came up with, make sure that it is visible throughout the book. Make sure that there is something for a reader to be holding on to and inspired by throughout. You're going to be testing this book with target readers, and we're not talking about buddies who are going to say, no, it's great. Oh, you're such a good writer. No. Test it with beta readers who are going to tell you whether it's readable and whether there's something that they loved or whether there's something that made them just want to let go of that book, right? Super important. A lot of literary agents will tell you to spend way longer revising your manuscript than you think you need, and longer revising your manuscript than it took you to write it, for sure. And that's why in my From Idea to Publish in 6 months, that's why I actually have a single month dedicated to writing that first draft, and then pretty much 3 months dedicated to cleaning it up and getting it ready to go out there. So really 3 times the time than you think you need or than it took you to write your book. Pretty important. You know how you're writing that book for an audience, right? Test it on that audience and test often. Don't just rest on your laurels and say, one person told me it was great. Yeah, that's never enough. By the way, last week's episode was all about beta readers and dealing with beta reader feedback. You're going to want to listen to that because it is more crucial than you might have realized, even if you already gave it a listen. Now, next step, once you've revised and tested and cleaned it all up and made it perfect, you're going to be producing that book, right? And by the way, this is kind of interesting, but this may sound counterintuitive to you, but I actually really do recommend self-publishing your books, at least at first. And you're thinking, wait a second, but if I'm publishing conventionally, I'm going to get these publishing companies to market my book and do huge advertising campaigns. Well, maybe eventually, but really, this isn't necessarily the way that bestsellers get done. When you self-publish your book, it can be a faster way to becoming a best-selling author if you're holding up your end of the deal, which is doing the work. You can address trends faster, you can pivot more easily, you can publish more books in a shorter time. Just remember, don't shortchange yourself by rushing any of the steps, but really, you can make this book what you know to be the thing that's going to touch your specific niche. When you're getting your book published through a basic publishing company, they're often trying to make it something that's going to appeal to a broader readership. And while that's kind of cool and may pay off in the long run, if you want rabid fans, which is what we want to do that word of mouth marketing, you might want to self-publish because you know who your rabid fans may be. So let's just assume that you're self-publishing. And by the way, you'll hear my weird little tip about literary agents and this and that. If you are in Writing Coach on Demand, in that bonus content, you will not believe what I do. Anyway, you're going to be producing your book. The packaging of your book is really, really important, right? First impressions count. The first thing that your potential reader is going to come in contact with is the cover, is the title. All of that counts. Make sure it's a cohesive package. And now think about which formats are going to be best for your reader. Is it an audiobook that's going to move the needle? I'm really thinking hard about creating audiobooks for my books, and that's definitely one of the next steps because I know that my books are really conducive to being consumed as an audiobook, and I know that I have the know-how to produce an audiobook myself, so that could be something that sets me apart. Keep that in mind, what sets you apart, right? But really produce that book. And you know the feedback that you got on the story itself and on the idea and all that good stuff? Make sure you get feedback on your title and on your cover. My first book, I was struggling because I had this title that I wanted that I thought was going to be really cool and really intriguing. And you know what? I don't think it was as cool or as intriguing as I thought. It was actually just confusing. And after I finally listened to enough people who told me, hey, you know what? Your title doesn't work. I finally changed it and I brainstormed with a good friend of mine who did me a huge favor by improving my title. And then same thing with the cover. I had some covers that I was really intrigued about. And I then kind of went and did that beta testing on my covers as well, and I'm glad I did. I still think there's some improvements that I could do to my covers, but you know what? Again, always learning, always changing, always pivoting. Let's keep moving forward. You can't beat yourself up, by the way, if you've done some of these things completely wrong in the past. This is all about how to keep moving forward and to improve as we go. So we have produced our book, and now we're going to self-publish our book. And before you do that, try to get some advanced reader copies. Try to get people to pre-buy your book, because these things can move the needle on that coveted bestseller status, right? You can have more advanced copies sold, and that can definitely create the momentum. But don't try to convert readership in the wrong way, because when we're talking about book marketing, which is kind of the least favorite thing that a lot of writers have when it comes to, what their job is, did you know that the lowest converting thing possible when it comes to selling books is paid advertising? That's right. Ads usually don't convert. Now, you might be thrilled to have ads about your book showing up all over the place and this and that, but they don't really convert, and you're spending all this money and time on them. You know what does convert? I hinted at this earlier. The most powerful marketing is word of mouth. And for that to happen and keep happening, that's that whole thing about that perpetual, that perennial bestseller, right? We're trying to get momentum. We're trying to make that push happen and keep happening. Readers need to be independently moved to recommend your book to others. And for that to happen, your book needs to have made a powerful impression, right? So if your book doesn't hit hard like that, be it through its story or through its presentation, go back and make sure it does. Because a book doesn't just need readers. It doesn't even need a lot of readers. It needs a few rabid fans. These are fans who are dying for the next one, who are raving about how this book touched them, who are going to be posting about it on social media, talking to their friends, and doing all that kind of stuff because your book touched them and touched them personally. And now in terms of marketing, you're going to be doing these deeply unglamorous things to try to reach out and touch the one or two fans at a time in a deeply unglamorous way, right? So give copies away. Join in on that dorky Zoom book club discussion with those uncool old ladies. What if one of them loves it and raves to her whole group at the, botanical garden she volunteers at, or, in her mahjong playing club? You're going to get some more rabid old ladies who love it, right? Go to that backwoods library for that event that like 4 random people show up at and show them a great time. Maybe one of them will convert into a rabid fan, right? Foster that handful of people on your email list. Give them value every single time. Show them they're special to you and that you value them, right? This is the kind of author platform that really matters. Your followers on social media, for example, yeah, they can be converted into a few sales, but ultimately it's the real connection that's going to move the needle. And remember that you're going to be working really hard for those first few connections, for those first few readers, but eventually this can start to happen exponentially without you having to be involved in every single interaction, right? It might not happen at first, but over time, if you are really sincerely touching people one by one, this is going to start to happen. And I mentioned, don't let that book of yours go dormant, right? I was in danger of doing that. I admit it with my own books. I release them and then I kind of drop them. I move on to the new thing. This is not what we ideally want to do. Releasing new editions or new formats can help us to keep relaunching our books to a new market, or reminding our readers as we launch another one and another one and another one, because write another book. That is my top tip. In addition to writing for your reader, writing more books is your way to build on this fan base that you are slowly building, right? Each new book builds your previous books up, and it creates an additional entry point for new readers who then may go back and buy all of your other books. So that's it. I think that hopefully, even me talking about this, like I get fired up again to try to market my books more and to try to write books that resonate more strongly with readers. I have every hope and every confidence in you that you are capable of writing a book that's going to sell well. And if that's what you want to do, just do the things that you need to do. Some of them can feel uncomfortable. Some of them can feel like it's a lot of hard work. But at the end of the day, this is your work. This is who you are. This is what you plan on doing for the rest of your life. So just do it right. Best of luck to you, my friend. If you're a member of Writing Coach On Demand, you're now going to go to that extra bonus materials and you're going to go check out your worksheets. And if you're not in Writing Coach On Demand, I highly recommend you join, because if you join in the month of October, you are going to be automatically sent in to get a free course from idea to published in 6 months. That is a $497 value for as long as you're signed up for Writing Coach On Demand, which works out to less than $1 a day. Are you kidding me? So I look forward to seeing you. Feel free to set up a 15-minute call to see how I can best help you. Sign up for one-on-one coaching, but definitely, I think this Writing Coach On Demand thing is no joke. It is really working out for so many of the writers who are taking advantage of these short office hours, the motivation, the inspiration, keeping themselves on track. It's a beautiful thing. Thank you again for being with me on the How to Be an Author podcast, and I look forward to being with you next time. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.